Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to some Mr Ballen, and the video is the most effed up circus act on camera. I mean, we know circus acts can be pretty brutal. I mean, not in terms of happening to humans, but like, it's just like, there's a lot of animal shows and stuff, and then they can go wrong and all these sorts of things, but I don't really know what to expect here. I've never done a reaction like this. I mean, based around circuses, I don't know what could really go wrong, but I guess if it's involving an animal or maybe like a magic trick gone wrong or something like that. But we're going to check this out and see what exactly it is. And yeah, this is also just posted, which is why I'm reacting to it. But we're just going to check this out. Hopefully going to enjoy. If you want more Mr Ballen, let me know in the comments. I mean, I'll probably do it anyway. But yeah, let's just check this out and see how messed up this really is.
There are a handful of images that periodically make the rounds on the internet because they're so shocking and horrible looking that most people assume they are fake, but they're not. Today, I'm going to tell you a wild story that is the background to one of those photos. And then at the end, I will show you this totally bizarre and shocking photo. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please wire the like button's bedroom lights to turn on every time the like button gets in bed. Also, please subscribe.
This is random, but he looks chiseled as hell. Was he? Let's just see Mr Ballen quickly, because he's looking like proper, like his chin's looking sharp. Was it this sharp a few months ago?
One night in
I mean, easy to convey, he is just, but he looks like,
listening to the siren, and eventually, after about 30
yeah, he's lost a bit of weight. Fair enough, man. I don't know if he's like doing a weight loss thing or something like that, but he's looking sharp.
to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
The grand finale. What a name. What a title.
On September 12th, 1916, residents of the little mining town called Kingsport, Tennessee, left their homes and packed the main street. Because on this day, a traveling circus called Sparks' World Famous Shows was coming to town. The performers in this traveling circus were going to put on a big parade and then end it with a traditional circus act. This was going to be the most exciting and biggest event that had ever happened in Kingsport. Kingsport was not an affluent place. Most people lived in tents instead of homes, and many of the roads were mud. And so they were really desperate for something fun and exciting to happen. By around noon, all the residents who were lining the main street began hearing the sound of music off in the distance. And then from around the corner came clowns who were banging cymbals and blowing on kazoos. And then there were acrobats and dogs painted different colors. And there were men juggling and walking on stilts and walking upside down. There were horses and lions and trained sea lions. I mean, this parade was a total spectacle, and the residents of Kingsport loved it. They were screaming and cheering with excitement.
You have to kind of think, like, back in these days, circuses would have been like the main, like, way to have fun, because cinema, was it a thing at this point? I don't know if it was. Maybe it was beginning, but at the same time, it's not really the same thing when you got like a live show of people doing this crazy stuff. So I mean, I can only imagine how it would have been back in these times when, like you said, it was in an area that there wasn't much going on and stuff. They would have been so excited for that. And then is this the one where it's going to go wrong? I'm assuming it is. Oh God, what's going to happen?
But the most exciting part of this parade were the elephants. There were 5 of them, and they were at the front of the parade, and they each had their trunks wrapped around the other elephant's tail. So they were walking in a line. And the elephant at the very front of these 5 elephants was very clearly the star of the show. Her name was Mary, and the owner of the circus, whose name was Charlie Sparks, advertised Mary as being the largest living land animal on Earth. She weighed more than 5 tons, which is 10,000 pounds, and Charlie had had her since she was a baby, and he had taught her many tricks. She could stand on her head, she could play 25 songs on a trumpet, and she could throw a baseball. Charlie loved Mary like she was his child, And Charlie knew that Mary was really his ticket to real success. At this time in America, there were lots of other traveling circuses that Charlie had to compete with, and generally speaking, Charlie's circus was on the smaller side. And so this was frustrating for Charlie because he was always trying to find new ways to grow his circus and make it more fun and enjoyable, but a lot of his efforts didn't really work out. However, he at least had Mary, who always seemed to draw a crowd. And when Mary walked down Main Street of Kingsport, everybody was totally amazed by her, and they were totally jealous of the man on her back who got to ride her. It was her handler. His name was Red Edridge. When the parade finally came to an end, and Charlie was getting ready to shift the entire performance from parade to traditional circus act, Red, Mary's handler, took Mary and led her over to a nearby pond to let her get a drink of water. Red, who was 38 years old, was new to elephant handling. In fact, Charlie had hired him just a day earlier when Charlie's show had passed through Virginia, where Red was working as a janitor. Animal handlers in Charlie's show were all trained to treat the animals gently, especially Mary. But Red was a grouchy person who was a very skinny guy with bright red hair, and he had been teased for much of his life, which had kind of made him a mean person. And so as he and Mary are walking over to this pond, Mary saw a watermelon on the ground and stopped to eat it. And as she was doing this, Red noticed there was a group of people kind of forming up around them, just kind of amazed by Mary. And they were noticing that Red was trying to get Mary to go to the pond to get her drink of water, and she wasn't listening. She was focused on the watermelon. And so Red very likely started to feel insecure, that they would think he wasn't in control of the animal. And so he got mad, and he took his metal prod and he jabbed it into the side of Mary's head.
What? What the that was not the turn. Oh my days.
Right behind her ear, breaking her skin. Now, Mary was a very gentle creature, but over the past 24 hours that Red had been her new handler, he had been cruel like this. And so when he poked her with that prod, it was like Mary snapped. Mary dropped the watermelon, turned to face Red, and Red, he's startled by this and just kind of stares up at Mary, wondering what's going on. And Mary would wrap up Red in her long trunk and throw him into a nearby
Good. I'm glad you stood up for yourself.
drink stand. At this point, the crowd of children and other people from Kingsport who were watching Mary started to scream and run away. And Mary, she was not done with Red, who was now groaning and rolling over onto his back. Mary walked over to Red, and then she got up on her hind legs and came crashing down directly, all 10,000 pounds of her, onto Red's skull, killing him instantly.
Jeez.
Charlie heard all this commotion over near the pond, and he ran over and he found Mary looking totally terrified, and so he began to comfort her, and then he noticed on the ground next to her was Red's mangled body. And around this time, the townspeople who had run in fear had now come back, and they saw what Mary had done. And instead of being scared of Mary, all these townspeople got angry and began screaming at Mary the elephant, "Murderer! Murderer!"
Poor elephant, man.
Once the news headlines fade about whatever terrible thing happened to them, the victims of violent crime and their families are often left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives all on their own. This is why we started the Mr. Ballen Foundation. It is a registered 501c3 charity whose sole purpose is to help these forgotten people. However, we can't do it alone. Since last year, with your help, we were able to raise and give away to victims of violent crime and their families nearly $500,000. And this year alone, our studio, Ballen Studios, is going to donate $1 million. And to be clear, the Mr. Ballen Foundation does not make a profit. Zero. Meaning 100% of your donations to the foundation go to the cause. Not to overhead, not to salaries, nothing. It's just the cause. So if you're looking for a highly transparent, very active charity that is just trying to do the thing we say we do to support victims of violent crime and their families, then look no further than the Mr. Ballen Foundation. To make a donation, simply go to mrballen.foundation and click on donate. Again, that's mrballen.foundation and click donate.
Love that.
This was, of course, a worst-case scenario for Charlie just from a business perspective, because Mary was the star of his show and she had just very publicly killed her handler. In the hours after Red's death, news of murderous Mary began spreading around town and to other towns nearby, and before long there was a mob of people trying to kill Mary who had to be held back, and then also the sheriff of Kingsport at some point came up to Mary and fired his gun at her, but Mary was so big and her skin was so tough, the bullets did not penetrate. Also, within hours of Red being killed, the town that Charlie and his circus were supposed to go to next sent word that they were not allowed to come if Mary was going to be with them. Charlie knew that at this point, even though Mary had been the star of his show, that if he didn't get rid of her, he would be out of business. He'd be financially ruined. However, he loved Mary. She was his oldest and most loyal partner, and he couldn't imagine giving her up. But Charlie was also very ambitious, and he had a whole crew of people in his circus that depended on doing these shows to make a living. And so, on the night of Red's death, Charlie would lay awake all night just thinking about what he was going to do. And by early the next morning, Charlie had come up with a plan. Charlie ordered his entire circus to pack up and get back on the train. They were going to head to the next town called Irwin. And Charlie said, once they got there, they would put on a show that no one in the world had ever seen before. Sparks' world-famous shows arrived in Irwin at about 10 a.m. that day, and immediately all the performers began setting up for this big show, which again would start with a parade, followed by a circus act, and then a grand finale. Now, Irwin was already packed by the time the circus actually arrived, because news of what Charlie had planned for this grand finale had reached Irwin and the surrounding towns, and so everybody had flooded this town to see it. At midday, Charlie's team was ready, and they began the parade, but Mary was not a part of the parade. Instead, she was chained up inside of the main circus area where the circus act would take place after the parade ended. And when the parade ended, it put on the circus act right around Mary, but Mary was not unchained. She was left in the middle of the circus, just kind of standing there, not sure what to do. She kind of swayed around with the music and trumpeted a few times, but she was confused and no one really knew what she was doing there. And then finally, the main circus act came to an end, and most of the performers went back into their tents. And at this point, all of the crowd who had been watching this circus began making their way over to the railroad yard. At the same time, Charlie and several of the animal handlers came out and grabbed the 4 other elephants who were not chained up, and they went over to Mary and they unchained her, and then they formed all the elephants up in a line with each of the trunks connected to the tail of the next elephant. And they marched all 5 elephants over to the railroad yard, where now there was a massive crowd that also included the press, who had shown up with their cameras ready to capture the grand finale. Charlie led Mary and the other 4 elephants onto the railroad tracks, which were up on this embankment, and once they got up there, Charlie halted the other 4 elephants and sent them away with their handlers, and left Mary all alone on the railroad tracks.
Oh, no.
And at this point, as Charlie is consoling her, one of the circus performers came over and chained Mary's back legs to the railroad tracks.
What?
Now, Mary was extremely well trained, and Charlie is right there comforting her. And so even though she was nervous as she was getting chained up, she didn't try to fight it. And as this was happening, a railroad worker climbed into a machine called a derrick, which is basically a...
What the fuck, man? Oh, this is gonna be horrible. What the fuck? Jesus.
big crane that's able to lift heavy things like lumber off of the railroad cars. And so this worker hops in the derrick, which is on tracks, and he brought it over right behind Mary. And so once the derrick was in place, and once Mary was securely fastened to the tracks, another worker climbed up onto the crane of the derrick, so the actual arm that was jutting out over Mary. This worker climbed up on top of it, and he grabbed the chain that was dangling off of it, and he jumped onto Mary's back, carrying this chain, and he looped it around Mary's neck and secured it, and then jumped off of Mary. At this point, Charlie, who was still holding on to Mary's trunk and comforting her, gave her one last embrace, and then turned away from her and walked down the embankment toward the huge crowd, who had now gone totally silent, sensing the grand finale was about to start. Once Charlie reached the crowd, he turned around to face Mary. He signaled the railroad worker in the derrick, who then pulled a lever inside of the derrick. At this point, the only sound that could be heard across the whole railroad yard was the sound of this chain that had just been activated slowly being retracted by the derrick. And so as it was pulling Mary up off the ground by her neck. And so as it tightened around Mary's neck, and she realized she couldn't go anywhere because she's anchored to the tracks by her back legs, she began to panic, and she kept looking over at Charlie and trumpeting, trying to get someone to help her, but no help came. And eventually the derrick tightened so much that it lifted Mary's front legs off the ground, and her back legs were still on the ground. And so with one last look over at Charlie, she let out a trumpeting call, and then her back legs left the ground and she went silent. She was hung there until she died. Mary's public execution was Charlie's big grand finale to this show. He had killed off this murderous elephant in an effort to appease the masses and save his circus business. And it did work. His circus continued to grow for a number of years. I mean, lots of people were interested in coming to see whatever he was doing because of the infamy around Mary. But after killing Mary, Charlie was never the same. He would actually retire early and then die in 1944. Today,
That was so fucked up, man. I was not expecting this at all. What the fuck, man?
Tennessee is still known as the town that hung the elephant.
That is grim. That is so horrible, man. Jesus. God damn, that hit harder than some of the other ones that I watched, to be honest. I mean, how you can do that to an elephant is beyond me, but different world that they were in back then, but still. Crazy stuff, man. That's the first video of the day. It's just gone 10 o'clock in the morning and that's what I'm watching. Jesus. Yeah, that poor elephant, that's all I can really say. That was hard to watch, but yeah, that's that. Sadly, this is the way to start the day, but yeah, I mean, you're probably watching this reaction late in the day because I usually post his reactions later on, but the time that I'm watching this, it's very early in the morning, so that's good news. But yeah, until next time, peace.